Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings, and in the Indigenous language of New Zealand, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Please welcome to our broadcast. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon or this morning or whatever time you happen to be dialing in to see us. My name's Josh Williams. I'm Head of Consulting here at Skills Consulting Group. And it's my pleasure to be joined by my colleague Michelle Ruddenklau, our skills strategist and principal consultant here with Skills Development Group. We are here to talk to you this afternoon, hopefully like we often talk to each other. We have a chat about stuff and usually things get interesting. And, I'm in particular going to talk about capability frameworks. And overall, we're going to talk about how transforming an organisation into a skills-based organisation is a good idea, and what you need to do in order to be that, and then all of the good things that come out of that. But without further ado, welcome to the broadcast, Michelle. It's nice to be with you again. So I think I first met Michelle in a small South Island town in New Zealand called Timaru, where we were talking about school-to-work transitions, trades academies and youth guarantee, and really about how we could provide better and more effective pathways for young people from school into a wider range of options. But the list of what Michelle hasn't done is shorter than what she has done. She's written strategies, she's evaluated models, she's written qualifications, she's written programs. Gosh, she's worked in the food and fibre industries in New Zealand, which is a pretty big deal. She's worked in the beauty industry, she's worked in the healthcare industry. But the one thing I would say that boils all that down is that Michelle is one of those, she has a very special skill set called getting passionate about turning strategy into action. So 15 years of experience. We're super glad to have Michelle now leading up and heading up our skills development group and our global team around skills diagnostics and skills assessments. Michelle, hello.
Josh, thank you very much for the welcome. And for those that don't know Josh, he's our head of consulting here at Skills Group, and I've been an admirer of Josh's work in the sector for a long time. And I think those that know Josh know him as essentially the reputation of bringing the world of education and the world of work together. So former chief executive at the Industry Training Federation, large senior policy roles and analyst roles for the New Zealand Ministry of Education and New Zealand Qualifications Authority, absolute expert across school to work transitions, and certainly been at the forefront and leading edge of critical developments in the New Zealand education system over the last 20 years. He certainly contributes to a lot of global industry forums and is the country manager for our global apprenticeship network in New Zealand and co-convener for the New Zealand Vocational Education Training Research Forum. Also on numerous governance roles and including a judge for the New Zealand Diversity Awards. So great pleasure to have Josh and his big, large, capacious brain today on the webinar.
Gosh, and we've only got 30 minutes, everybody, and thank you for reading out the full bio. I always find that difficult to listen to. Thanks, Michelle. But no pressure. I always remember a former colleague of mine, Ruma Karaitiana, saying, after all that, I can't wait to hear from myself. So thank you very much for the intros. Some quick housekeeping just for those that are on the call who might be watching it later. We are recording this, and so at the end of the presentation and the webinar, the link will be sent so you can watch it again or watch it at another time. And also we've got a Q&A function running in Zoom as per normal. We will do our best to keep an eye on that, so do feel free to send us through thoughts, comments or questions on the way through. Okay, then Michelle, what would you like to ask me first?
Well, I guess we're talking about the concept of being a skills-based organisation, and I guess the question is, why is this increasingly important at the moment?
Yeah, cool. And I'm going to then ask you what a skills-based organisation is. But look, first things first, I think wherever anybody is in their economic cycle, whether the labour market is loose or tight, if you like, losing people is a bad idea and retaining people is a good idea. A resignation is a giant productivity suck, because even if it is easy to find someone else, you're kind of starting again with them. You're inducting them. You're incurring the costs of a recruitment. You are changing the dynamic of a team or of an organization. And so when we think about how to make our organizations high performing and productive, the main thing we need to think about is how are we moving along people? How are we progressing them from the beginner through to that middle period? And how are we turning as many of our people as possible into masters, into gurus? When the challenge is retaining people, and it is, as I say, whether it's a boom cycle or a bust cycle, actually hanging on and growing and investing your people is a very good idea. The number one reason people stay is you pay them. The number two reason people stay is that you invest in their development. And so for me, the importance of understanding what skills you've got, where your gaps are, and how you're going to build forward is critical. And that's why being a skills-based organisation, having a capability framework, I wish someone would come up with a catchier title than capability framework, but when you've got one, it's pretty exciting what you can do with it, and, keen to talk about that as we go through. So, Michelle, what is a skills-based organisation and what makes it different from any other kind of organisation?
Really interesting because they aren't a completely new concept. Certainly have been around for a few years, but they're increasing in popularity, and you're certainly seeing a lot more of them and a lot more material and promotion of them. And essentially, it's an operating model which is focused around defining your work and structuring the workplace around specific skills rather than traditional job functions and position descriptions. So this approach is really emphasising just what you've talked about, recognition of employees' unique skill sets, and the organisation of that work is around a portfolio of those fluid structures. So your skills are actually flowing out to the work, not the other way around. And that focuses on tasks, projects, and outcomes, which is replacing those traditional jobs with position descriptions that are set. So who does the work? It really is towards a workforce of one, where your individuals with their unique portfolios of skills and capabilities contribute to the organisation, and you're really matching those individual skill sets with the work that needs to be done. So basically you can build up and form those teams quite quickly, cross-functional teams, and then you can disband them once the task or the outcome has been achieved.
Yeah. So that means knowing who you've got and what they've got and what they can bring, and understanding all the way from kind of goals and strategy through to, therefore, what that means for the knowledge and skills and behaviours that you're needing in your organisation in order to produce the things and achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. I'm just going to touch on those role descriptions, Michelle, because oftentimes when our consulting team is working with an organisation, this has happened private sector, public sector, educational institutions. One of the first things we'll say is, okay, so if we're wanting to build a capability framework, that means really understanding the skill sets, working that into some themes or some clusters, talking about the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and then really building the progressions and the indicators. What is it like to be amazing at this? Have you ever seen someone before or worked with someone that you thought was incredibly good at this thing? What did that look like? What were you seeing? What were they doing? That's often the way that we try and extract what the skills and capabilities that would, form up in a capability framework might look like. But I want to quickly say we never rely on JDs. We've all met, and probably many of us experienced, meet someone in a pub and go, how's the new job going? And they say, oh my God, it's nothing like what the job description said. Or just through the natural business cycles and the progression of time, the JD, when you got appointed, is a guess at that moment in time about what's actually going to happen in terms of tasks, activities, work requirements. The organisation might change. You might go through a restructure. There's plenty of places we go where people go, actually, I don't have a job description. Other organisations say to us, actually, over the years, we've now developed 141 different job descriptions for what we think are actually about 5 different roles. These are all kind of real examples. And I think the cool thing about taking that as one step to unpack it into skill sets what are the skills, demands, tasks, what do the progressions look like, what does good look like, then repackaging that. Again, we can talk a bit more later, but it's that allows you to do some pretty important alignments internally, from recruitment processes through to individuals self-assessing how good they are or where they feel they are, navigating to the horizon about being better at the job they've got, or thinking about what they've got that might help them move into an adjacent role or a higher role. So yeah, validating those things is really important to really get to the real oil of what the skills needs actually are. Does it line up and align with organizational strategy and vision? And if you don't have one of those, well, then you probably need to start there as well.
And I think what you've just said there is that the importance of the capability framework is actually organising some of that, because when you go to this huge fluid structure and this nirvana of no potential job roles or position titles, that's just a step too far for many organisations that need to organise these things. And there's lots of jargon, skills architecture, there's the skills hub. But I guess coming back to the capability framework and being able to talk about skills hubs is a really, really useful way of actually organising that, that people can actually recognise as well. So which brings us to the concept of capability frameworks, and for many they sound technical, potentially a bit boring. So can you explain in simple terms for our people what they are and why they're important?
Yep, cool. So I'll talk about sort of the process, just touching on what I said before, but in particular, then I think the benefits, right? So when you've got one of these things, and I do agree, like sometimes, capability framework, if somebody does have a catchier title, please feel free to chuck it in the Q&A. But as I said before, I mean, what we're really doing is we are identifying key roles, but also particularly functions. And also, it is about culture and behaviours and things that people want to see. What's the organisation you want to be, and how do you move towards that? So I definitely kind of lean in probably on the sort of behavioural aspects of that. So, these are the things we are wanting to see and the skill sets that we want to grow. And also, like I said before, this is about investing people to keep them engaged and making sure that wherever they're at in terms of their own particular career journey within the organisation, but also more widely as a person, as an emerging leader, or wherever they happen to sit in the organisation, what are the current capabilities? What have you got? What does it all add up to when you take the people that you do have with the capability framework? It kind of is its own benchmark. You now know that you've got this many people sort of at the beginning, and this sort of people who are operating, in the intermediate or sort of advanced. And these are kind of, where mastery or exemplar kind of people are operating as well. So, where you're at both as an individual and an organisation around what is the mix of skill sets now. And as you're going to talk about with the work you do with the skills assessments, you're actually going to establish and diagnose that at the beginning and at the end. So you can actually tell if you have made a difference, if a difference has been made. And when you're kind of analysing that, what are the things that you might need to put in place to fill some of those gaps? So that's about the assessment tools. Sometimes that also goes to accreditation, credentials, digital badges, whether kind of for internal or external purposes. But I think another really important part that I enjoy is working with the clients in terms of their language. Do you call them customers or clients or stakeholders? It's about creating a common language that the people that may be in the HR department, the L&D managers, the people that are recruiting. Now, if we have a capability framework and we know what we've got and what we're really looking for, can be quite future focused and aligned, and even how they ask the questions at interview time around the people that they're bringing in, because there's that song sheet, that touchstone of the skills that are set out that everybody can see and understand.
So in terms of, I guess, if people are thinking about that, sounds a little bit still complex and a lot of work. So it's where do people begin, and what's the process that you generally go through?
Yep. So again, like before, generally speaking, obviously when consultants are working with clients, we will have our key focal points, but we'll very quickly be asking them for permission to go and talk to their people. on the ground. So obviously sponsors and responsibilities. I mean, the other thing I'd just note in this case is that, a lot of what I've talked about so far relates pretty well to medium or large organizations that have got people in capability or got HR departments. But of course, and I think this is the strength of the tools that we've got now here at Skills Development Group, a lot of organizations are small. We're a country full of small and micro-sized enterprises that lack that kind of infrastructure. So, if there are some easy ways for them to understand where they're at and what their needs are, that can be pretty important too. So as I say, JDs are one thing. We never look at job ads. We're not one of those companies that crunches through job advertisements and decides that's actually any kind of accurate description of the skill sets. But we do often validate, well, if your job isn't like the job description, what is the job like? What are the requirements? What are the ways of working? How do you wish to relate to your customers? What's important to you? All driving back up and trying to align with the vision and the principles that's driving the organization at a high level. So, it ends up in a pretty ordinary piece of paper. But as I say, when you've got that map, and it is a map, you can start lining up quite important organizational processes in behind it. And we get a lot of people, like I said before, who are they're doing training, they're upskilling their staff. There's a PD budget, but it's feeling pretty scattered for them. They don't really know if they're hitting the right areas or if it's making a difference, or if the thing that they're rolling out for their key roles is today's best practice. So we kind of have that element too as part of a training needs assessment, is like, well, this is what we think the capability framework looks like, and this is actually some of the ways and models and best practices for delivering that upskilling.
And I guess that sort of brings to the next piece, which is really around the actual skills assessments and the how do we know in terms of what you've got and what you haven't got. And there's certainly a few different ways that we do that. And one tool, I think I hasten to add, isn't the only tool. And I see there's a question in the chat there around do we assess against Sophia, and the answer to that is the tool that we use, the platform that we use, doesn't. It covers a whole number of things, from cognitive assessments through to behavioural traits, through to we've got over 300 skills tests, and that's everything from advanced leadership skills to remote skills to typing. We can assess against role-based, but we do have a partner that we refer to for Sophia that does do the assessments and credentialing against that. So we do, where we haven't necessarily got something that we think is useful, we do definitely partner with others to be able to do that, so that we're offering that comprehensive solution. And certainly for the soft ed side of the business, which is global, that's US, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, is that Sophia framework is incredibly important for those knowledge professionals. So coming back to the different types of assessments, I guess the key thing with those is that the initial scans, and essentially where you're sitting, and we work with our clients in that beginning place of what do you need, and making sure we're not giving people things that they don't need either. But when we're talking about the whole skills-based organisation and getting down to the granular level of skill sets, really important to be able to actually assess what those are. And I would like to note that assessment is a yucky word. We know it's got negative connotations. I'm not sure diagnostics or diagnosing is much better, but for want of better language on that at the moment, it really is about recognition and self-awareness of where people's strengths are and where their development areas are. So looking at the cognitive set, we can be looking at verbal, numerical reasoning, logical reasoning. The behavioural set is very much based on Ocean or Big Five, so scientifically predictable. So a little bit different to the personality tests, which can be Jungian based, and that's not to put them down because everything's got its place. But this is really a little bit more predictive in terms of reliability and validity productivity. When you're adding in values insights, that's more effective behaviour, and that's really showing what people's drivers or motivations are, where they get their energy from, and that's incredibly important when we're talking about retention and keeping your people. And I guess with that, you're also seeing at a team level when you layer this up, where you can potentially have value clashes. So we're talking really about identifying fit within the team, and also organisational culture, which is huge. So I think that blend and triangulation of what different types of assessments of diagnostics is huge when we're looking at those competency frameworks or capability frameworks, and you're layering it back into actually what are the organisational strategic goals to meet business objectives, and you get that nice alignment right from there right down to this granular level of what are the skills we need. And we may also choose to take a strength-based approach. So really with this, we're not necessarily focusing on all of the gaps or development areas and trying to lift that up, but taking an 80% strength-based approach in terms of productivity, as research shows that this is incredibly intelligent way to actually lift your performance and productivity. And of course, when you're aware at individual level and at team level of where your development areas might be, you can supplement those with complementary assessment profiles. You also too can then start to build out your training pathways. So coming into, I guess, some of the whys, looking at strengths to perform requirements of your role or your project, your development areas, fit and culture, values and drivers, training and professional development. And I think key is for L&D managers or team level managers, it's actually really important to think about the time involved in conversations on unpacking what people's skills are, because that's actually huge and does take time. So this is a tool to speed that up. Also with tight L&D budgets, it does actually allow you to be very targeted with how you're spending your money so you get a return on investment. And we're hearing that globally, is that people are more and more, how are we measuring the effectiveness of training? How do we know that our training's actually working? So this is certainly getting pretty positive feedback. And the last thing I'll say around that is the inclusivity. So when you take away the human component of, or not take it away completely, but support it, this improves that whole equity piece. So it's much more bias-free. It's sort of transformed from a popularity contest, or enables those who may not self-promote well. They may have come through a culture of where it isn't, you don't put yourself forward or self-promote. And those that are neurodivergent, this is certainly accounted for within that. So it can really inform that strength-based approach there as well too, and highlight people's areas which they may not themselves.
I really like that. I mean, both the strengths-based approach, but also that removal of biases. It reminds me involvement I've had in the public sector, and in fact as a judge of New Zealand Diversity Awards. One year I think the Supreme Award went to the Public Service Commission for its work to address the gender pay equity gap. Why am I raising this? It was already illegal in New Zealand since the 1970s to pay a man and a woman a different amount for the same job, and yet when you looked at the data, of course, that's exactly what was happening. But here's what happened. They took all of the job descriptions, they unpacked them into their skill sets, and then repackaged those roles back in terms of skill sets. When you do that, of course, it becomes completely indefensible to pay a man or a woman a different amount, given that's the skill set. So that's what they were looking at, and that's what they were weighting. And of course, the results that came out of that, of course, we don't all have the mandate and the weight of the public sector, but that gender pay equity gap has gone a long way to being substantially addressed or turned around, at least for the first time since the 70s. And I think that really does demonstrate the value of when we take away, here is your job, here is your JD, this is your performance expectations if you want to keep this job. When we unpack roles into the actual skills that underpin those roles, then actually that is an inclusive way of going about things. Can I just go back really quick and reflect again on that strengths-based thing? Because I've found this too. We often are commsing pretty carefully if someone's just getting into this. because they are afraid that their people might think they're going to be judged. Or if you build this capability framework, it's going to quickly turn into a performance framework. I mean, I've talked about this with some of our own colleagues here as well about, ultimately the things we want to be good at, if we know what they are, then those are the things that we ought to be evaluated on or judged on when it comes to performance management time. But actually, this is about staff development, right? And if you've really embraced the culture as a learning organisation, as a skills-based organisation, and people just know that it's a part of the day-to-day that we're going to be looking at how to help you get to your next step, the kind of fear factor goes away. I was just wondering, do you have any reflections on that too?
Yeah, no, we hear that a little bit. People go through that initial piece of, oh, I'm really excited to find out about myself. And then, and certainly as soon as you add cognitive to the, people are generally quite comfortable about finding out behavioural components, about themselves, and what their values are. You add in the cognitive set and people do have that, am I going to be found wanting? But after people have been through the process, and we always complete our assessments with a debriefing session, so that they're unpacked, so it's supported, and that's huge, and a difference to going and getting an online test and a report and do what you will with it. So I think the piece with that is the human component of this is really important. The science component is really important as well. So usually once people have been through this, they have so many aha moments with it that they understand themselves better, and that self-awareness piece is really, really valuable. So I think once people have that, then that doesn't feel performance-based. That actually feels like, know thyself. And this is actually giving at individual level a targeted pathway for me to go. I know what I can focus on. I actually know that I don't actually need to focus on that area, or someone my colleagues can do that. So, for example, for people that potentially are in the innovation driving, starting place, they come up that in a team type sort of an assessment, knowing that you've actually got someone who's meticulous and a finisher, and loves playing in that space is really, really valuable. So I think once you actually go through it and add that, that's the piece which people feel actually really, really supported by, rather than it becoming about performance.
Okay, Michelle, there's been a couple more things. I think someone's asked for a question, for an example of a skills descriptor instead of a role or job description. I think the answer is yes, and we will send a PowerPoint slide deck, and we'll include something like that in that on the way through. What you've just talked to me about, and I did touch on it really briefly before, but what I really like about this is the ability, when you've got your capability framework and your skill set's clear and your understanding's that clear, the onboarding of people. I have personal conniptions about being involved in the recruitment of graduate analysts in the public sector, where the interview process we put those young people through with zero experience was testing them on things they were unlikely to experience for at least 5 to 7 years, even if they were brilliant. And it worries me greatly when that happens. And so I think when we think about progressions and the way to move people through, and skills are a supply chain, just like anything else, you'll always need to be maintaining those early workers, the people that have just come in, and all the way through, and then trying to move people along those progressions. So the idea, in my view, that, right back at interview, or the way that we advertise for roles, is actually truly speaking to addressing skills gaps, knowledge gaps, and the kind of the behaviours that will work for an organisation is just so incredibly important. Look, if Michelle, just to finish us, we've got only 1 minute to go.
1 minute.
And we want to leave you that minute, which is if somebody's online now or later and wants to talk about this further, what should they do?
Obviously get in touch with us via emails, via the website, and we can certainly organise a chat. And I want to, I guess, stress there in terms of the consulting piece, it's not about giving people things that they don't need, but we can certainly point you in the directions which are useful for you. So we don't just go and create capability frameworks, we also review them for people as well. It's really aligned to the size of your organisation. So that's kind of the first port of call there as initial call. What do you need? What can we potentially help you with or steer you in the direction of? Just a quick question, if I can answer that. Do you have your own framework or use existing ones based on client needs? In terms of frameworks, we use our own frameworks which we create, or we will work with the client's one. And again, that's very individualized when it comes to the actual capability framework. In terms of assessment platform and tool, we partner for our tool. So, and it's interesting you've got Balbin there, because some of the assessments are actually based on Balbin, particularly for the teams side of things. MBTI, Clifton, etc., and those Jungian ones, no. So we do partner with the platform, which gives us sort of global scalability that we need, and the variety. So we can send someone more information if you want to get in touch with me with that.
Awesome. Yep, and we will send out some of that stuff after this. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time being with us on the broadcast. I want to thank my co-host, Michelle Ruddenklau. It's always a pleasure. And look, for us, I hope that the last half an hour has just given you pause for thought, or one or two new thoughts. That would be our KPI. So look, thank you again for your time this afternoon, wherever you've joined us from. And look, we do hope to hear from you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.